Ready?
Hello, my name is Joan Wilson, and I want to tell you about one of my greatest fears. I don't talk about it very often, but I've been asked to come here today to discuss it with you all because I think perhaps by discussing it with you, it will help me overcome this fear that I have. Last year, I decided to drive from New York to California, and it took approximately 3 days and 9 hours to go from New York City to Los Angeles. And by the time I got to LA, let me tell you, I was worn out. That is a very long trip. Now, some of you are probably wondering why it is that I would drive instead of fly to California. Well, there's a very simple answer for that, and that is that I am deathly afraid of flying. Just the thought of flying makes me break out in this cold sweat. And people have asked me what it is that makes me so nervous about flying, and I usually respond by relating an incident that happened to me back in 1979 when I was about 9 years old. My father at that time worked at Safeway, which was a large grocery chain, and he had decided to take me on one of his business trips to Arkansas. So I remember that day. I was so excited. And I remember that we got up that morning at about 5:30. We ate some breakfast, and then we drove to the airport. Now, our flight was scheduled to leave at 6:45 that morning, and it was going to be the first time that I had ever ridden on an airplane, so needless to say, I was pretty excited. Well, I remember finding my seat on the plane and putting on my seatbelt and getting ready for takeoff. And as the plane started to taxi down the runway, I could feel my heart racing, and I had a window seat so I could watch as the plane lifted off the ground. The plane finally leveled out at about 23,000 feet, at which point I got my book out and started to read. About an hour into the flight, however, the pilot said that we needed to check to see that our seat belts were securely fastened. I didn't think too much about it until we started to run into some turbulence. And I'll never forget what happened next. I even remember the flight number. It was Continental Flight 2159. And I'd been drinking a Coke when all of a sudden the plane just started to take a steep dive and bank to the right. Well, people started to scream, so did I, and I remember just holding onto my seat and closing my eyes. Well, somehow the pilots managed to get the plane back under control. But at that point, babies were screaming, some of the ladies were crying, the men on the airplane were talking, and my dad, boy, he looked pretty worried. But anyway, we had to make this emergency landing and change planes at Love Field in Dallas. And, I really have to tell you that that was a very traumatic experience for me. And ever since that incident, I've always been very fearful of flying. Some of my friends have suggested that I go for counseling or take one of those fear of flying classes where you talk about your fears with other people who are also afraid of flying. Well, I've signed up for a class that starts next week, you will be proud to know. And the class meets once a week for 12 weeks. And I'm nervous because our final exam for the class consists of an actual flight with the class instructor. And I honestly don't know if I'll get on that plane or even pass the test. What do you think?